All right, welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0. I'm here today with one of our other Bionic Health advisors, Anna Simmons. Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Kelly, thanks.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our listeners?
I have been with Bionic as an advisor for about 2 years now. I joined after graduating. I went to UNC Chapel Hill and studied human development. When I was there, I worked as a personal trainer, got certified as a nutrition coach and health coach.
What inspired you to get into this field?
Great question. I have always been really passionate about health and specifically nutrition. I always kind of thought I was a health nut growing up. I loved eating healthy and learning about nutrition, but I also grew up playing sports and was really active as a kid. And then when I was at UNC, I there became a personal trainer and trained at my school's gym, and that really kind of grew my love for strength training personally. Like a lot of people, during COVID is kind of when I started getting really into it and just grew a lot personally and physically through training, and then kind of grew my love for helping others with that as well, and have just seen it really improve the quality of my own life. And so now I love helping other people find that passion as well.
That's amazing. And then how about the other side of the coin? As a member of Bionic, not just an employee, can you tell us a little bit about what you've enjoyed about that process and anything else you'd like to share about your own personal journey?
Well, kind of two main things. One, I've loved working with our physicians. I've learned a lot about my personal health and some risk factors that my family has in our genetics. So that's been really valuable for me and just have felt very supportive along the way. And then from an advising standpoint, I meet with you every now and then for check-ins. And I know that you've said, I believe on a previous podcast, the benefit of coaches having coaches. Like for everybody, it's really helpful to have accountability and just a support system, an extra set of eyes, giving input on my health habits and my goals. So working with you has been really great. I've learned so much from you in your background. And again, just extra accountability is always really valuable.
Absolutely. Yes, I definitely say that often, that coaches need coaches. We have our own internal bias about things. For example, I would hate writing my own training program because I would just take out the things I don't want to do. So likewise, I gain a lot from meeting with you as well. So we serve as each other's advisors, and it's been really helpful. And then we can try out different tools that help our members too. So I know that you mentioned already you have a strong passion for nutrition and especially meal prepping and just food in general, big foodie from what I know about you. So that leads us into our topic of today's podcast. So we wanted to talk today about nutrition, prep recommendations, things that might make meal prepping and eating protein specifically a little bit more easier and manageable. Let's start off with the difference between meal prep and batch prep. They're kind of similar, but can you just walk us through those differences?
So starting out with batch cooking, that is preparing large portions of food without pre-separating them into different meals. So that would be preparing a lot of chicken or a large portion of rice and just having that kind of in a container in your fridge or freezer to have and pull for meals. And then meal prepping would be prepping portioned out meals throughout the week. You might prepare 6 meals or 5 meals for your week of lunches, pre-portioned out, so that way whenever you want to go and eat it, it's already prepared for you.
Perfect, yeah. Both can be useful for different situations. I think finding out what your best flow is for yourself is what is going to be the most useful tool, right? So for example, maybe someone's cooking for a whole family and everyone has a different taste and palate. So you might have lots of chicken and rice that might not be seasoned one specific way, but then you can use them in a moment and change it throughout the week so it's not boring and repetitive. Some people don't like having the same thing every single day. I personally am the meal prep person, and I have the exact same thing for 1 week, and then I change it up just based on what I feel like I want to have that week. So they can both be useful tools at different times, for sure.
What other major pros and cons of batch cooking versus meal prepping have you found?
I think when I first started thinking about how I want to build my meals, it was born out of a need because I was super busy. And the only way that I was actually going to cook the right things for myself was if I had it prepared ahead of time. I hate having to cook something different every single day for every single meal and take my time in the morning to worry about that, and even in the evening after a long day. So for me, it was pretty easy to jump into meal prepping. There have been times when I'll batch prep, like if I come home from a trip and I didn't freeze food ahead of time, then I'll just make a crock pot of chicken and just throw it in the fridge, and then throughout the week I'll just build stuff as I go with what I have. But whenever possible, I take a couple hours on Saturday or Sunday and I just block my time to actually build my meals. And I kind of do batch prep and meal prep at the same time now. So like if I want carrots for a snack, I might like just peel a bunch, cut them up, and just put them aside. And sometimes I'll use those throughout the meal too. So if you already have stuff that you know you're going to be putting into meals, doing all of the prep up front of chopping has been something that I found really helpful, so that you know like, okay, I need these vegetables for these things. I'll prep them now, put them aside, so when you actually do the cooking, you're not resetting every single specific meal you're doing. So the cons, I would say, for most people might just be the repetitiveness of meals, but that's where if you can tie in different flavor profiles and use each of the things that you prep in different ways, then that's going to help eliminate a lot of that. Another potential con is the upfront time that's needed, but I have found that it's actually reduced my total cooking time for the week. So, for example, I mentioned I might block off time on a weekend. Sometimes it might take me 4 hours, split up between different parts of the day. I'm not going to cook the whole day straight, but it just depends on what I'm making. And I have found once you get used to the recipes that you make consistently, it makes things so much easier, and you don't really need the recipes as much. Like, you can start to build your own recipes and use different spices and different sauces, and that'll help tie things together. And then pros for me, especially, and for a lot of my members that I meet with, just knowing that things are ready to go and removing that stressor, even though once again it's an upfront cost, the actual benefit later on is you have more time to do what you need during the week because you're not always in the kitchen cooking, cleaning, and all of those things.
Absolutely. I would say the time spent on the front end really cuts down all your time throughout the week. Each time you prepare a meal, that time is taken away. Like, it's already prepared for you. Kind of decreases decision fatigue. Again, maybe a front end of the week deciding your meals, but then throughout the week you don't have to decide what you want to eat. You know you have a healthy option to reach for.
I'm really glad you brought up the decision fatigue. I think that is an important concept that people bring up but don't really have a term for. So a lot of members will meet with me and say, I feel like I'm so good in the morning, but I get to the end of the day and I just want whatever's easiest. And of course, like, we've spent all of our energy on other things during the day, so it's not surprising that by the end we're not able to be as restrained, so to speak, as we might want to be, or to eat the healthier items because we go for convenience. So that's where we talk a lot about improving food environment, and I think the batch prep and the meal prep kind of go hand in hand. So can you talk a little bit about food environment, tips and tricks of why that's beneficial and how that might help with meal prepping, especially in batch prepping?
Absolutely. Food environment is one of my favorite things to talk with our members about, and it's been really helpful for myself as well. We think about the actual food that we're eating or reaching for, but not considering how our environment impacts our decisions and our ability to adhere to whatever program we're following to reach our goals. I think a lot of people get frustrated when they are finding themselves reaching for cookies or candy if it's out on the counter, and think of it as kind of a willpower failure that they're not able to follow their diet when there's things all around them. But in reality, for most of us, if there's a cookie in front of us, it'll be really tempting to eat that cookie. So making small tweaks in your environment in the kitchen, I think, is really helpful to support your goals. So that can be anything from, instead of having a bowl of candy out on the counter, leaving a bowl of fruit and veggies out. The more that it's in front of you and that you're seeing it, the more likely you are to actually reach for it. And then kind of vice versa, having cookies or chips or sweets or whatever it may be doesn't even mean you don't have to ever have them in your kitchen or in your pantry, but sometimes just having them in an opaque container where you can't see it every single time you open the pantry, or even if it's higher up or lower down, so not kind of quite at eye level, can really help prevent snacking, or again, reaching for those things that you're wanting to limit, potentially not fully get rid of, but just limit throughout your day.
Definitely, yeah. And snacking in and of itself is not bad. We need to be eating frequently throughout the day to have proper fuel, to have good blood sugar control, and just have good energy and be able to think clearly. So just the items that we're choosing can be swapped out, right? So I think even the fridge is another good example to what you're speaking to. One thing we can focus on is putting those colorful fruits and veggies, those appetizing items, front and center and eye level is a helpful way to kind of combat this desire to reach for like a cookie or something else, which we can still have those too, but it's everything in moderation, right? Another thing that we talk a lot with our members about is nutrition recommendations. Can you walk through sort of how we go about that and why that's important and how that ties into some of this meal prepping conversation as well?
Definitely. I think it can look a little bit different for our members depending on where they're at currently with their nutrition, their background, what their goals are, all of that good stuff. But really for everybody, it involves just firstly kind of a holistic intake on what their life looks like, what their level of activity looks like, what their goals are. Often we ask our members for a DEXA scan, definitely not required, but it's helpful to kind of get an idea of what current muscle mass looks like, what current fat mass, bone mineral density, to kind of specify those goals even further. But from there, we ask for a 24-hour recall or just a description of what a daily nutrition intake looks like from first thing you wake up, what you're eating and drinking all throughout the day, typical kind of average day of eating, including those snacks throughout the day, nighttime snacks, any alcohol, caffeine, hydration, anything you're intaking basically throughout the day. Get an idea of what that looks like, chat through goals, whether that's losing fat, gaining muscle, maintaining, and just optimizing energy. From there, we will kind of more behind the scenes calculate what their resting metabolic rate might be. And that's kind of the calories that you burn at rest if you were to basically lay in bed all day, not do anything, how many calories your body would burn just
to stay alive.
Just to stay alive. Take into account an activity factor, whether they are walking throughout the week, whether they're really highly trained and training every single day. And then from there, getting some more specific numbers around macronutrient intake as well as total calorie goals for whatever their goals are. So Kelly, if you want to take it from there, I'd love to hear your take on giving more specific nutrition guidance.
Yeah, I think one thing that people don't necessarily understand about nutrition recommendations is there's a lot of traditional mindset of calories in, calories out, and that's the only way to move the needle. And of course, that's a huge portion of it, but the macronutrient composition is really important. So breaking down protein recommendations, which are going to be essential for both weight loss and muscle building or for increases in performance, having those amino acids, which is what is helping build those muscles, and other proteins in the body is going to be essential. Same with even having a good immune function and having good energy levels, so we're not having spikes in blood glucose and things like that. So trying to manage that. Same with the fat and carbohydrate content. Those are both key fuel sources that the body needs, and we want to make sure we're in a range that's appropriate for the goals, but also the activity level that an individual has. And these nutrition recommendations are not stagnant. Most calculations are based on body weight, so if you have big changes in body weight, that's going to impact the recommendations. If you have changes in activity level, that's going to be a big influence on the recommendations provided, and changes in goals. So maybe you were working towards an increase in lean soft tissue or muscle mass, and you hit that goal and now you just want to maintain. So we're going to adjust those recommendations based on that. So those are some key things to keep in mind, and checking in every 4 to 6 weeks, I would say, is a good rule of thumb to see if any changes need to occur based on, where you're trending and what those goals might become. And then that all ties into how we can break down our meals, right? So a lot of research has shown that instead of having a traditional American spread of protein where we might have 10 grams of protein for breakfast, maybe 20 grams at lunch, and then 40 to 80 at dinner, depending on how much we're eating, then that's a really skewed protein distribution. And a more optimal approach is to have evenly distributed protein intake throughout the day. So maybe that's 30 grams at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and 20 grams snacks. They don't all have to be exactly the same, but trying to make it so you always have these nutrients available is going to put you in a better environment in your body to see the changes that you want. So that ties directly into our meal prep and batch prep. A lot of people have difficulty feeling like they're getting enough protein throughout the day. That's probably our biggest feedback, is that that's challenging. It's filling, right? So being able to have these broken up more evenly is going to help with that, and with the preparation of like, okay, I know I can have my 3 eggs with 3 ounces of chicken, and that's 2 servings of protein, about 42 grams right there. So it's kind of easier to, I guess, change the perspective on how much you have to eat at a certain meal. And then another tip that's really helpful, especially if you're meal prepping, is to weigh out your proteins. And 3 ounces of meat is honestly not that much when you look at how big chicken breast might be, for example, or how big a steak might be. The serving sizes are a lot smaller, I think, than people realize. So you don't have to necessarily weigh your food all the time, but getting a rough estimate of what it actually looks like can be really, really impactful, both for feeling like you're having too much or even if you're having too little. Same thing with carbohydrates. Those are a lot easier to measure out. Just using like measuring cups is helpful. Fats are a little bit easier too. Fats are super nutrient dense and energy dense, so we want to make sure we're managing those. And like, for example, you could use your thumb as a reference point. Like your thumb's about 1 tablespoon of like peanut butter, for example. Of course, it's not perfect, but we don't need to be perfect. We just need to be within a range. So those are some helpful things that I think we can draw attention to and that you can talk to your advisor about, and we're here to help with those tips and tricks. So there was another question I wanted to ask you about, instead of just like the traditional batch prep, meal prep, do you have any other specific nutrition recommendations or like recipes that you think are easy for people to use? One thing that comes to mind for me, and I recommend often, is a product called Super Cubes. And it's a really easy way to freeze meals ahead of time. So let's say you're making like a chili, for example, and it makes a lot. So you know you don't need all those servings, so you can freeze the extra and have those for when you're coming back from traveling, or if you know you're going to have a busy week the next week, whatever you can do up front, kind of putting that off to the side. So that's one example. Do you have any others that you'd like to share?
Yes. So I know a lot of people do voice that they don't like re-eating the kind of same meals every day, which I personally can do, but totally understand not being able to do that or not preferring to do that. And so I love, again, batch prepping some chicken and then throughout the week make that into like Mexican style fajita bowls or Mediterranean bowls, or add some buffalo sauce. But kind of going off of that, I think you think of meal prepping as really getting ahead of the game and preparing, but even before that comes the grocery list. And so I would definitely recommend planning out your meals, or even just having a rough idea of a couple options of meals to eat throughout the week, and then from there strategizing in the grocery store. Having a list before you go in the store can be really helpful. Also, a lot of people kind of don't love grocery shopping or get overwhelmed by all of the options, so having at least some sort of a game plan, the more specific the better, but having a game plan of what you're planning on making that week, what you need to get from the store, and then being able to just go home and prepare from there is really helpful. Kind of going off of the grocery store tip, I find that staying towards the perimeter, you may have heard, is your best bet when it comes to finding nutrient-dense options. So that's something I like to do, like a sweep around the perimeter, and then there's generally always a couple things I need to pick up from the center, and that's kind of how I plan out my grocery shopping.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That was one of my key things I was going to ask you about next, because like you said, it can be very overwhelming to go into a busy grocery store and not have a plan, or maybe you didn't do inventory of your fridge or your pantry ahead of time. So like you might start buying extra things or not sure, and then you have to make extra trips. So like you said, even if you have time to plan out like an idea of like a month's worth of what you might have each week, or maybe you have go-to that you just know you love every single week. Humans are creatures of habit. Even if we get sick of something after a certain amount of time, for the most part, we get into a good routine of liking things for a while, for most people. Not everyone, of course. But having the plan is super important. Even if you don't have a full-on grocery list, it does help to know what you're looking for. And if you are going to use specific recipes, sometimes it's overwhelming to be like, oh, I don't want to buy this thing that I'm going to use one time. So looking up alternatives is a good tip, so you don't feel like you have to do more than you need. Or let's say you go to the store and the produce isn't looking as good as you were hoping it would look. So being able to swap out vegetables, most vegetables in a recipe can be changed. Same with meats, like you don't necessarily have to do one thing if it's not what you wanted. So being flexible and not having to follow something to a T is also helpful. But yeah, having the guideline and the list just takes out all the stress, and then your food waste and your costs go down because you get into this rhythm of knowing what you need. So for me, another personal example, I have a lot of protein to be eating throughout the day. I compete in Olympic weightlifting, so I have a lot of specific training goals that I'm focused on, and I just need a lot of nutrients to support that. So for me, I know exactly how much chicken I need every week, how much ground turkey I'm going to use, and then I can swap out the types of recipes I'm using based on that. But I don't waste any of my food anymore because I know exactly what I need for every single meal. And that has taken a long time to get used to. I think another thing we have to note about habit changes in general, progress is not linear. You may have seen a graph in the past where there's like what people think progress is and then what it actually is, and it's just squiggly lines all over. But that's true. There's going to be ups and downs. There are weeks where I barely get to the grocery store and I just eat whatever I can, and that happens, and that's okay. So not having pressure to be perfect, once again, I think is important.
I love that you mentioned that progress is not linear, and it's not about perfection. Really, I find with a lot of people, just starting with, okay, let's hit 30 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, that might be the first step, and it might feel like a challenge at first, but when they get in the hang of it, they're like, oh wait, this actually isn't that challenging. Even just kind of macro tracking whatever nutrition goal you're working towards will get easier with time, and it won't always feel like this mental load of, oh my gosh, I have to replan my meals for this week. And that also translates from, more specifically, macro tracking. You mentioned serving sizes are really important and change a lot in a health journey. People can be eating very healthy, but their macronutrient levels or just total calories aren't quite in line with their goals, and that's what's preventing them. And so it's a small tweak there, but once you learn what a serving size looks like or what a portion that you're striving for looks like, you won't forget that, which is really helpful, and why I oftentimes do recommend very even temporary tracking. And I don't recommend that for everybody, especially having potentially a challenging relationship with food. I wouldn't recommend that for every single person, so that's where individuality really comes into play with nutrition recommendations. But having some sort of awareness of what 3 ounces of chicken looks like and how much protein is in 3 eggs versus 5 eggs, all of that stuff. Once you learn that, you'll understand and you won't forget it. And then you won't have to track moving forward. Tracking isn't meant to be a forever thing.
I also want to re-emphasize what you mentioned about breaking down a long-term or a bigger aim into a smaller step. So maybe, let's say you have to eat 150 grams of protein, which sounds like a lot, but breaking it down into a more, no pun intended, bite-sized approach might be helpful for breaking it up throughout the day. And maybe for the first month, it's only focusing on breakfast and saying, I'm going to make a really well-balanced breakfast. I'm going to have fruit. I'm going to have my protein that I need for this amount, the carbs and the fat, and I'm going to start with that and move from there. Another question I had about nutrition for you is, how do you approach working with members that might focus on having like one meal a day or might eat more sporadically? Maybe that's timing on like a busy job where you're on your feet running around. What sort of helpful advice would you give them for meal prep or for tools that they can use to try and be more consistent even if they can't sit down for a full meal?
Consistency really is key with all of these changes. Like, you can eat perfectly for 3 days in a row, but if you have 1 or 2 days where you are completely off track over time, it's going to take a lot longer, if any time at all, to see those results that you're looking for.
Right. And that could be over-consuming or under-consuming, right?
Exactly. So when it comes to consistency, I think that's when meal prep is even more important and really helpful. So people who have a lot of kids that are busy moms or work kind of crazy hours and feel like nutrition just isn't going to be a consistent thing that they can follow moving forward. I think that's where preparing your meals ahead of time is really helpful. Also snacks. I think having healthy snacks prepared ahead of time that really can help you reach that protein intake throughout the day is really key. So I think working with a coach on that can be really helpful to personalize those tips, but I think really staying prepared and getting a list of healthy snack options, healthy meal ideas, and finding what works best, finding what you enjoy is really key. What about you? Any other kind of thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say I kind of mentioned this a little bit briefly, but I just wanted to bring it back up about using your freezer as your friend. I think that I mentioned the super cubes, but things that you can prep ahead of time, like maybe like a frozen yogurt popsicle, that would be a fun thing to make, and kids might enjoy as well if you have a family. So things like that, or even batch prepping or like freezer ready smoothie cubes is another tip, whether that's in super cubes or something else, another container. You could freeze breakfast burritos or breakfast sandwiches, so maybe that's not your everyday thing that you're using, but that's something when you're on the go or in a rush, you could quickly pull out, microwave it, and you're good to go. So using that as a tool can be really helpful for just improving things. And then even down to using frozen vegetables and frozen fruits. A lot of people have this idea that using frozen items aren't as healthy or aren't as good, but they're actually flash frozen at peak ripeness. So a lot of times they have more nutrients than fresher unfrozen foods. So yeah, that's another easy one that you can just keep stuff in the freezer and not have to go shopping every week. Using places like Costco, grab a massive bag of broccoli or edamame, pop that in the freezer, and then you've got a month's worth of vegetables that you can defrost at any time. So that's another really helpful tool that people can utilize.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Anna, any closing remarks, any last comments that we may have missed, or any summary points you want to make about steps people could make towards implementing meal prepping, batch prepping, any kind of prep to help with making nutrition a little bit more manageable?
One last thought is that I've kind of been known by my friends and family to be very flexible around recipes, which has worked to my advantage and detriment in some situations, especially baking. But one thing I would say for
baking, you have to be more strict on the recommendation.
baking, I do need to work on my level of strictness with that. With getting started, if you maybe don't enjoy cooking, haven't cooked much in the past, are kind of really intimidated by the prospect of meal prepping, I would say don't worry so much about finding a really complicated recipe or a recipe that even has a lot of ingredients. I always kind of avoid those. I just don't love buying ingredients that I know I won't use over and over again. You can definitely go that route if you enjoy that. But starting very simple with your meals and really focusing on spices and seasonings and then sauces. Sauces, a lot of times I'll make at home, like make my own dressing or make my own like Greek yogurt dip. I guess that's another meal prep protein advice. If you have some plain non-fat Greek yogurt and add peanut butter and honey to that, you can make a really nice like dessert dip for some fruit. Or if you take plain non-fat Greek yogurt, add some ranch seasoning or other spices, you can make a veggie dip that's high protein as well. But all that is to say is just keep it simple. Don't put too much pressure on yourself for making very extravagant, complicated meals. Start simple in terms of recipes, but also start simple in terms of your goals. So maybe you have these big goals of, okay, now I want to start eating 150 grams of protein every single day and track everything that I eat and make sure everything's perfect. I say start with very small, incremental changes. Really with nutrition always is going to be the move. Start small. And again, that can look like just start with breakfast. Focus on breakfast for a couple weeks, or maybe just focus on your protein intake. Into things that feel very doable. Take a deep breath, and working with a coach, a friend who really is knowledgeable about nutrition, somebody else, is also really helpful just to make it a more social, have some more accountability, make it fun.
Great tips. Thank you so much, Anna, for all that you shared today and for being on the podcast today. It was great to talk to you, and I look forward to our next podcast together.
Me too. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.